Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 18. Justice just is. The general assumption is that we are all innocent until proven guilty. This is the principle that's been used in legal systems for many centuries, and it's usually upheld, although miscarriages of justice do sometimes occur. Outside the legal system, in our daily lives, the opposite principle is often applied. We will, more often than not, instantly judge a person as guilty unless he can prove his innocence. You may think I'm being a bit harsh here, but my observation of society at large is that we are very judgmental of each other. Perhaps not all of us do this, but generally we have our judgment autopilot fully engaged most of the time. This is not so much about criminal behaviour, but more that we judge others as doing things that we may or may not approve of. Judgment occupies a lot of our thinking time and produces largely negative thoughts. We have opinions about everybody and everything, and we either voice our views or think our dark thoughts of disapproval or jealousy in private. Sometimes our judgments are so severe that we explode with anger, and then perhaps we feel full of remorse when we realize we have overreacted. If our anger remains unexpressed, resentments can build up inside us, and these can be quite harmful. It's said that having a resentment is like drinking poison and then expecting it to damage the other person. In truth, resentments damage only us, and they can lead to self-abusive behaviour and can also cause chronic disease through stress. Judgment is endemic in our world and doesn't seem to do any of us any good. We all like to be right about everything, and we like to think we know best. If we are right, we certainly want everyone to know it. If we're wrong, we try to keep it quiet and hope nobody will notice. If we do something wrong and get away with it, somehow that doesn't seem to count. But woe betide anyone else who does a similar thing and does get caught. Double standards are everywhere. We tend to take every shortcut we can and then moan and complain when others do the same thing. Our self-righteousness is astonishing to behold. The media industry likes nothing better than to build up and idolize a personality, only then to castigate and destroy him when he slips up. We can blame the press all we like, but we are the eager consumers of the stories they produce. Somehow we think people in the spotlight should be perfect, and we judge them harshly for their mistakes. We do this even though many of us are more than capable of behaving in exactly the same ways, or worse. Self-righteous judgment of others is one of the more ugly sides of ego. We cast aspersions everywhere, whilst at the same time build a protective shield around us. We keep our dirty little secrets to ourselves and deflect attention in all directions other than inside us. Once again, I say all of this not as an innocent observer of others, but as someone who has been self-righteous and judgmental to the core. My life was run on ego, and my spirit was buried beneath an avalanche of culturally induced selfishness. I had the equivalent of a PhD in finding fault with everyone else but me. I did it because it was automatic behaviour, but now I know better most of the time. Spirituality enables us to suspend all judgment of others and allow everyone to do his or her own thing without the need for our opinions. You may think the world would degenerate into chaos if everyone thought like this, but I take the view that the ego of humanity has already built a chaotic world based on fear, greed, and selfishness. Minding our own business brings us peace of mind, regardless of what everyone else is up to. Given that we are all a complex mixture of selfish ego and selfless spirit, it can easily be seen how it is that we can be both guilty and innocent at the same time. The ego feels guilty about itself and looks for guilt in others, whereas the spirit is pure innocence and sees love and perfection in everyone. We are all guilty and we are all innocent. This may seem a strange concept, but once we grasp this duality of existence, judgment of ourselves and others can quickly fall away. Non-judgment becomes the next logical step in the established sequence of acceptance, surrender, and humility. Having accepted and surrendered to the truth of human nature, and having gladly received the gift of humility, we now see that everyone is in the same boat. This mixture of ego and spirit is within all of us. We all have the duality of guilt and innocence, and are all capable of fear and love. When we act from ego, we live in fear and judge others by our own standards. When we act from spirit, we live as unconditional love and have no need to judge anybody or anything. The universe is way beyond our comprehension and is an amazing self-correcting mega-system that takes care of everything in its own way. Spirituality teaches us that we are not needed to police the universe. We learn to focus on ourselves and on our own contribution to life, and we let others do the same. As individual human beings, our greatest gift is our free will to choose how we live our lives. We may be spiritually minded, but there's no requirement for others to do likewise. Most people are not even aware of the possibility of living this way, and many others have varying degrees of understanding, but still choose to live mainly from ego. Well, this is all as it is, and there's no need for judgment. The spiritual way raises awareness of the alternatives and leaves individuals to decide for themselves. This change in perception of others is like a miracle. Instead of fearfully looking for fault in others, we choose to look for love. We see love in others, even if they don't see it in themselves. There's love and light in even the worst of us, and we can choose to focus on this goodness. The ego will always try to highlight what's been done in sinful error, whereas the spirit will simply see an innocent mistake. The spiritual person will seek to heal rather than judge. Even if we think for sure that we are right in any given situation, it's still preferable to suspend judgment than to take the moral high ground. This will seem impossible at first, but it becomes more natural as we grow spiritually. We can choose not to be judgmental even while we continue to think that we have the right to do so. Gradually, this belief in righteousness fades away, and we will see that our opinions of others are neither relevant nor helpful. Instead of wanting to change everyone and everything around us, we instead allow ourselves to change. Rather than demanding change in others, we become the change in ourselves. Giving up judgment of others may seem like a sacrifice, but actually it pays priceless dividends in terms of serenity and happiness. Whilst we remain judgmental of others, we continue to feel judged ourselves. But once we stop passing judgment on the world, we can start accepting ourselves. The two things reinforce each other, and once again we see the potential for a downward spiral of judgment, resentment, anger, frustration, self-criticism and fear, or, alternatively, an upward spiral of acceptance, contentment, serenity, surrender, humility, self-approval, and love. It's difficult to stop judging others whilst we still feel guilty ourselves. We use self-righteous judgment of others in order to avoid having to look at our own issues. The solution is to look at ourselves first and allow judgment of others to slowly fall away. Despite my discomfort with life, the idea of spiritual principles did not initially appeal to me, because the last thing I wanted to do was admit that there was something wrong with my thinking. My assumption was that everyone else was as judgmental as I was, so I was justified in my opinions. I was always judging myself as either superior or inferior to others, which then strengthened my feelings of separation and isolation. Half the time I felt better than others, and the other half I felt lesser. This mixture of arrogance and low self-esteem was confusing and unsettling. After working through the 12-step recovery program, I was able to see that my ego was indeed deeply flawed, but that my spirit was full of goodness and love. It was when I allowed my ego to subside that my spirit began to reveal itself, and in so doing, my thinking and my behaviour began to change. Instead of feeling unhappy about circumstances, I came to see that there is no such thing as a justifiable resentment. Instead of projecting my guilt onto others and judging them by my own standards, I was able to accept defects of character in them and in myself. Instead of considering myself perfect and looking for perfection elsewhere, I saw my own imperfections and accepted them as they were. I moved from self-criticism to self-acceptance, and then to humility and self-love. I stopped judging my own desires as ugly and accepted them as being part of who I am. Suppressed desire leads to guilt, whereas acknowledged desire leads to freedom from the bondage of self. In accepting myself, I became free to choose differently. Choosing to be accepting and non-judgmental then brings the benefit of serenity. Letting go of our preoccupation with the unimportant allows time to focus on growth. When we look for faults in others, we find fear, whereas when we look for love and spirit, we find inner peace. We will always find what we're looking for, because both ego and spirit exist in everyone. When we become spiritually aware, we can choose what we want to see. When we punish others, we end up punishing ourselves, whereas when we allow others to be as they want to be, we feel comfortable in our own skin. If we cause pain in another person, that pain will go full circle and end up back with us. But likewise, if we transmit peace and serenity, that is what we will experience. During my career as an accountant, I was privileged to lead many teams of colleagues who had a wide range of talents and abilities. Given my inner core of fear and low self-esteem, I was afraid of conflict and avoided difficult and confrontational situations. In so doing, I subconsciously developed a management style that was based on praise and recognition rather than criticism and close supervision. This inclusive and supportive style seemed to work well in most cases, and I experienced the dual benefits of being perceived as a good boss and having a committed and loyal team. I inadvertently discovered the incredible power of praise. It's possible to be encouraging and supportive and at the same time provide constructive feedback in areas where development would be helpful. We all blossom in an environment of recognition and appreciation, and we all struggle in the face of criticism and negativity. As with all things, we can choose to focus on either the positive or the negative. My management style was by no means perfect, but it gave me an early lesson in how my attitude towards others created my own subsequent experience. However, I didn't realize at the time just how powerfully this basic idea could apply to all of life. And as with other spiritual principles, it takes practice to become non-judgmental. Despite the obvious personal and collective benefits, we still often resort to ego and pass judgment on the world. Whether we do this quietly in our own minds or publicly through voicing our opinions, we take the view that we know best. It's a wise man who knows that he does not know. It takes wisdom to allow things to be as they are and let the natural process of life unfold. Our task is not to change others or bend others to our will, but to change our own perceptions. We cannot force ourselves to change overnight because the ego will lead us back to our old ways. What we can do is make a start along the path of spiritual growth. We nurture our growth through acceptance, surrender, humility, and non-judgment. If this all seems impossible at first, we can perhaps just accept the possibility of another possibility. We can then allow ourselves to explore a different way of being. The very important point to make here is that non-judgment does not imply or suggest tacit approval. If we don't judge something as negative, that does not mean that we judge it as positive. We don't have to be either for something or against it. There's nothing that says that we have to have an opinion about anything in particular. Having strong opinions about things that don't really concern us, and then getting into heated debate or conflict with others to prove that we are right, is a sure sign that our egos are running the show. The spirit does not judge, nor does it need to take issue with those who do judge. Rather than judge those who have yet to let go of ego and find their own spiritual path, the spirit will treat them with compassion and love. For example, if you don't happen to agree with me on this issue of non-judgment, then that's perfectly okay with me. I don't judge myself as right, nor do I judge anybody else as wrong. I suspend judgment on all matters, including myself. This is my understanding of the way to inner peace. Spirituality teaches us that we are not individually required to cast judgment or administer justice. The natural process of life will take care of everything. Justice just is.